Thank you for attending the Satori software webinar, What's Coming in January. Before we get started, I'd like to cover just a few quick housekeeping items. Number one, if you participate in social media, you can connect with Satori software via Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook. Next, this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available shortly after the broadcast, and you can find it on the webinars page of satorisoftware.com. Next, there's a question box on the right-hand side of your screen. Please feel free to enter any questions during the webinar that you may have, and we will collect these questions for Kim and Bob to answer at the end. They are eagerly anticipating lots of questions for this webinar. Aren't you guys?
Yes.
This webinar is scheduled to last 60 minutes. However, in the event that we run long or you have to drop off, we will continue to answer questions until we run out of questions. If you do need to drop off, as I mentioned, the webinar, including those questions, will be included in the recording on satorisoftware.com. I'm Rob Perrin, the Director of Merchandising for Satori Software, and I will be your host today. Joining me are Kim Mock, Postal Product Specialist. Good morning, Kim.
Good morning.
And Bob Shimmick, Senior Director of Postal Affairs. Hi, Bob.
Hello.
Agenda-wise, we have 3 items. What's not changing in January, equally important, what is changing in January, and, well, looking forward. That's the crystal ball part of this presentation.
Indeed.
So let's get started, Kim.
All right. So I'm sure everyone is anxiously awaiting all of the changes that are scheduled for January. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot to report. Right now, if you log into the USPS site called RIBS, the Rapid Information Bulletin Board System, which nobody calls it that, they just call it the RIBS website, and you go to the schedules page, you'll notice that in the 2015 releases, there is absolutely nothing posted for the January 2015 release. There's no release overview, there are no release notes, there's really not much there that we can talk about. Well, part of that is probably due to the fact that, that unfortunately right now, all of the USPS systems are on a bit of a lockdown. So you may have received an industry alert from the post office, or you may have heard in the news recently that, that the post office was subject to a hacker, or maybe several hackers. They've got some speculation as to where that came from. But basically all of the information systems from the post office are on this interesting bit of a shutdown right now, where we've got some other Postal One releases that are also on hold because of this hacking scandal here. So fortunately, we did receive a preliminary draft of the release notes for January just this morning. So right hot off the presses, we have some information that came in from the post office about their next Postal One update. Now, we took a quick look through these release notes, and there's really not much to report. They've got several bugs that they're going to be fixing in several of their systems. There's going to be a few tweaks and changes, but nothing really significant. So there are going to be some changes, for example, to the way that the self-service terminal is used. Also, there's going to be some changes for what happens if you're doing full service and you don't want to have to pay your permit fees, because if you are sending more than 90% of your eligible mail as full service, you do not need to pay your permit fees for the year. So they've got some good changes there. They've got some good improvements to the nonprofit section as well, and but it's not going to be anything that's going to require a software change. It's not going to require a new version of anything. So there's really not much to report with this January Postal One update. So along with that, there's a lot of stuff that we're used to seeing in January that we're not going to see in 2015. There are no new postage prices. So the Board of Governors a couple weeks ago actually sent out a notification saying that they do not intend to increase prices in January. Now, part of that is due to some ongoing litigation around the exigency prices, and there's all of these appeals that are happening around the full service mandate, and until those courts come back with their decisions, the post office really can't act in a forward manner to be able to change those prices. Of course, they're never going to want to reduce postage prices, so they're going to wait until they get their final decision before they make any changes there. Since the prices aren't changing, the postage statements aren't going to need to change, so you won't need to update your postage statements in January. There aren't any new mail preparation regulations, so by now we've usually seen some type of a Federal Register identifying all of the different rate changes and all the different sortation changes that are going to be required, and of course we haven't seen anything like that, so we're not expecting any mail preparation changes for January. Along with that, there are no new service type IDs. That's that service type ID that's included in your Intelligent Mail barcode. Now, there is going to be a new program that starts this month called Secure Destruction. Unfortunately, at this time, the post office is not publishing the service type IDs that are associated with secure destruction. However, those would be the only new service type IDs, and the existing ones aren't going to be changing at all. There won't be a new edition of mail.xml because, again, there are no mail preparation changes that are associated there. And then there's also the full service invoicing. So previously, we had expected that that invoicing for full service errors would start in January. That's actually been postponed outside of January as well.
All right, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit into taking a look at what are some of the things that we do know are changing. And before we actually look ahead to January, I wanted to talk a little bit first about what happened this week and what didn't happen this week as well. And that would be over this past weekend, the Postal Service was scheduled to deploy a new version of Postal One, and there was a number of changes associated with that I know the industry was waiting for. Right before we hit the weekend, last weekend, the Postal Service sent out an announcement saying that the deployment had been put on hold and that there would be an announcement as far as when this new release was going to be coming out. Then at the beginning of the week, as Kim noted, they sent out the information that this cyber attack had occurred, and that was really the reason for this release not being deployed over the weekend. So as of where things stand right now, the Postal Service has not yet announced when that release will be deployed. So we're going to just have to continue to watch and wait and see what the Postal Service is planning to do. Now, we'll get into speculation later about what that might mean for January as well. Some of the other things that were included in the November 9th release, just so people are aware, was there has been, with the previous release of Postal One that's currently in the field right now, there's been a number of issues and questions coming up around mailer scorecard and the accuracy of the data. So as Kim mentioned, there was a number of fixes that were scheduled for the November 9th release, plus the other thing the Postal Service was doing with that November 9th release was there were a few problematic areas within the scorecard where they know the data has problems, and those areas were going to be pulled, and you would actually see once this release deploys that your scorecard would actually get a little bit smaller in size, just because some of the problematic statistics and data points were going to be hidden, just to avoid all the questions and concerns that are being raised around that. The other thing was, with this November 9th release, we were kind of in a little bit of a limbo phase here about the Postal Service saying, don't spend a lot of time digging into your mailer scorecard until we get this new release out and get the fixes deployed. And so they had kind of said, wait until around mid-November, and then you can start looking at your mailer scorecard again, and then starting to dive into the data a little bit more. Well, now that that release has been delayed, they haven't really said anything yet, but one would assume that mailers should continue to kind of stand down on really diving into the mailer scorecard until this November 9th scheduled release actually occurs. So the other thing that is coming is, now looking ahead now to January, is there is going to be a number of fixes that are going to be going into the mailer scorecard, and there's going to be a few other things that are going on. One of the things that we know for sure right now is that the next release, the January release, is going to continue to support the two versions of Mail.dat that are currently being supported right now, which are 14.1 and 14.2. 14.1 is not going to be changing at all. There's nothing the Postal Service is going to be doing. They will continue to support it, but no changes to it. 14.2 does have a couple of changes that have been announced. For those of you that may be plugged into the Mail.dat working group, would have seen an errata was published earlier this week, and that errata contains several items that are more, I would consider them tweaks and tweaking items, just to address a couple of items. In particular, Parcel Select, there were some changes made where we were really going back and doing some cleanup, because some of the values that were being used for Parcel Select were still labeled as Parcel Post in the specification. Parcel Post no longer really exists. It's Parcel Select. Those were updated. There was also a new value added to indicate Parcel Select single piece. There are also some other changes that were made to create some values that the Postal Service is going to be using internally, and kind of reserve some values within the specification. So you'll see those things reflected in the 14-2 specification. So right now that 14.2 errata is published, and the intended implementation timeframe for it is that January 25th release. Also, one of the other things that the Postal Service has announced looking ahead to 2015 is that they are going to continue monthly updates of Presort data. So one of the things that recently happened, if we go back to beginning of September, was where we started into this new schedule of monthly updates of Presort data. And so that is going to continue throughout the whole year. I know the visual there is a little bit of an eye chart test, but you can go out to the RIBS website, and you can, if you go out and look for the 2015 schedule, they do have this out there and posted. And so, I mean, it's not that exciting. You know, pretty much every single month there's going to be a new update of data. The one thing to call out, though, is that one of the things that's happening in 2015 is the Postal Service is moving forward with Phase 2 of network rationalization. And one of the things that they've noted there is that they are going to be rolling out Phase 2 in several deployments, but all the changes for Phase 2 of network rationalization will be done by the fall mailing season of 2015. And so those of you familiar with the schedule also know that major changes to the label list data only happen on the first month of every quarter. And so there's going to be 3 essentially big quarters of label list changes as the Postal Service deploys Phase 2 of network rationalization. And that first one is going to be in January, because January is going to be the first major, and the other 2 are going to be in April and in July. So July will be the last one where there will be major changes, and that will be the final rollout of Phase 2 of network rationalization. And then at that point, the Postal Service will have their network in place that they would be using for the fall mailing season next year. One of the other things that is going to be changing with the January release is the final set of threshold changes related to parcels. So for those of you that are mailing parcels, the Postal Service has, over the course of this year, been kind of ratcheting up the threshold points that must be met. And you can see them listed there, where we're at now in November. You know, unique trackable barcodes must be on 99% of all your pieces. And so that's already at the threshold and is going to stay the same when we hit January. The next one, though, is right now the Postal Service is requiring a zip+4 or the delivery address for 95% of the parcels that you are submitting. That threshold with the January release is going from 95% up to 98%. And then also note the asterisk there. One of the other changes with this release, or with that January timeframe, is that the Postal Service is changing the requirement from providing the ZIP plus 4 to you have to provide the full 11 digits. If you don't have the full 11 digits, then you must provide the delivery address. So there's a slight change there in what is really required. And then also the Postal Service is going to ratchet up how many of the mailings must contain the shipping services file version 1.6 or higher, where it's going up from 95% to 97%. And the impact is, with the January release, everyone needs to be aware that if you are claiming commercial rates and you are not complying with these thresholds now, once we get to January, the Postal Service will start enforcing that mailers will have to start paying retail rates when they do not comply.
Okay, so we do have at least a couple things that are happening in January, but one of the things that we wanted to cover today is what is actually going to happen for pricing in 2015. You know, usually by now we have a really good indication as to what prices mailers are going to have to pay for the coming year. And right now, because we don't have that new pricing defined, there's a lot of people who are wondering, how am I going to budget for 2015? How do I make sure that that I'm going to be able to cover my postage costs? So really, what the pricing depends on is those two cases that are currently in the appeals court. So one is the post office is contesting a certain part of the exigent case that says that the exigent case is finite, so that at some point they're going to have to roll back that 4.3% exigent pricing that they put in their initial proposal. The other case that's currently in appeals court right now is the full service mandate. So if you'll remember, back last year they were saying that, okay, we're going to require full service for all automation rate mail, and then the PRC came back and said, well, actually, in order to use full service as a requirement, that's really effectively a price increase. So if you are going to mandate full service, you're going to have to make up for that in pricing, and the post office didn't want to do that. So those two cases are currently in appeals court. We're awaiting some type of a decision any day now. We were hoping to have something defined by this webinar, actually. So we're still kind of waiting on what's going to come out of those appeals processes there. So there's really two effective outcomes of these two exigent cases. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the full service appeal. Regardless of what that appeal comes back as, we do know that the post office is really wanting everyone to move to full service. So regardless of any mandate, regardless of any way that appeal process comes back as, we do strongly recommend that our customers move to full service for all their eligible mail, just so that they can be ready for whatever type of a thing that the post office comes back with after this appeal has been decided. So even if the appeals court says yes, a full service mandate is a price change, you can expect that the post office is going to try and get around that in some way. Maybe they start changing the pricing to make full service more enticing. Now, there's all these different ways that they can encourage mailers to move to full service. So we strongly recommend that you start that process today if you haven't already. So let's talk about that second appeal that's going through the courts right now. And basically there are really two ways that this can happen. So the post office is contesting this idea that the exigency is finite and that this 4.3% rate increase that happened last year is going to have to end, and it will have to roll back at some point. So if the USPS wins that appeal, then basically what will happen is that 4.3% price increase becomes permanent, and you can expect that as soon as we figure that out, if it's ruled in their favor, they're going to try and apply the CPI-based price increase as soon as they can. So that could be probably mid-spring, so maybe around maybe April. And we should hopefully be hearing about this court case again fairly soon. So basically what would happen is at that point, prices would go up around 1.7 to 2% based on the CPI increase. Now, if the USPS loses that appeal in the court process right now, what will happen is the post office will be required to roll back those exigent prices as soon as the exigent total has been satisfied. And the way that we're calculating that right now is that the exigent pricing should actually be rolled back around the September to October timeframe in 2015. And so what will happen is we would expect at that point that the post office would leave pricing alone until they've satisfied their exigent amount. And then at that point, they would take the exigent pricing off and apply CPI at the same time. So effectively, they almost kind of cancel each other out. We may see just a slight decrease in postage in fall of 2015 there. So there's really two ways that this court case could go. One obviously is definitely better for mailers. We would definitely hope that the post office would lose that appeal and that prices would go down at the end of the year. However, you do have to plan for the worst when you're scheduling your budgets for 2015. We do recommend that you plan for the worst case scenario. So the worst case scenario is that exigent pricing would become permanent and that the post office would apply that CPI-based increase as soon as they could, which again would be about mid-spring. Right now, the CPI amount is about 1.7%, and as you know, each month that passes, that CPI amount is going to increase just a little bit. So you can budget about 1.7 to 2% increase in postage and feel pretty safe about your pricing for 2015. The other thing that you will need to prepare for is that full service invoicing. So as you know, the post office is starting to grade those full service metrics using the mailer scorecard, and you'll want to make sure that you're not going over those established thresholds for full service compliance, because then you will be subject to that full service invoicing, which means your full service discount would be removed for that amount that you're over the threshold. And so obviously you want to make sure that your processes are in place so you don't go over the thresholds, but also you might want to put that into your budgets as well. So let's talk a little bit more about the invoicing. Now, like Bob said, the plan was that after this November release of Postal One, there would be a pretty clean look at your actual data in the mailer scorecard for you to review, so you could act on any of the errors that you're seeing, and also to make sure that everything is running smoothly in your operations, and you would not be subject to these invoices. Now, however, with the postponement of this November release, it's going to be difficult to say exactly when mailers are going to have a clean scorecard to look at. Right now, as Bob said, we don't know exactly when this November Postal One update will be applied. So it's a little bit of an unknown now as to when mailers will be able to take a look at their scorecard and trust the data that they're seeing there, so that you can make the changes that are required to make sure you don't get hit with this full service invoicing. We have also heard that the only time you would actually have to pay an invoice is if your actual total amount due for that month was over $50. Now, there's been a lot of back and forth about, okay, is it a cumulative $50 or is it $50 per month? Do things get rolled off after a month? What happens if you don't pay? A lot of these questions have yet to be answered. And we do want to kind of outline here what's really at stake here. So within full service, you're going to want to make sure that your barcodes are unique for your trays, sacks, pallets, and pieces. And you're also going to want to make sure that your by-for information is correct in your electronic documentation. That if you're using co-palletization, that you properly document that in the OCI file in mail.dat. That the entry facility that you enter in your electronic documentation is correctly defined, and that you have a registered mailer ID on all of your pieces, and that the service type ID is actually applied correctly to your mail so that you're using the correct one for the services that you're claiming. Now for each of these, the only discount that's actually at risk here is your full service discount. So if you go over, for example, the 2% uniqueness threshold, you would only be liable for the full service discount for the amount of mail over that 2% that was in error. So if you had 3% of your mail that was in error, only 1% of your mailing would be charged the full service discount. So that's not terribly much. I think there will be a lot of mailers who, especially the smaller mailers, who will never reach that $50 minimum.
Yeah, because if you do the math, if it was a standard mail piece and you lost, the 1/10 of a cent discount, you would have to be over the threshold by 50,000 pieces before there would be any type of invoicing.
Yeah, so we hope that none of that happens to you. That would not be happy. So let's talk a little bit more about the schedule for these invoices. This definitely seems to be the hot topic in the mailing industry right now. So today we have some data that's available on the mailer scorecard. Unfortunately, even the post office admits that the data is unreliable. They're counting some things and doing some math that isn't terribly reliable. You never really know if the error is the mailer error or a post office error. There's a lot of problems with the data that exists today. Now, again, there was supposed to be that November Postal One update there that was going to fix a lot of these problems and hide the ones that they couldn't fix, and everything was supposed to be great and happy with that November Postal One update. Unfortunately, it's been postponed indefinitely, so as soon as we get that Postal One update applied, that's when we'll be able to start looking at those mailer scorecards and trusting what we see. Now, the next Postal One update is scheduled to be in January, and with that update, we'll actually start seeing some data around move update, and that'll be the review-only information, and we'll also start seeing some data coming back for seamless. So a lot of the problems right now with the mailer scorecard are with the seamless areas of the scorecard, and so all of those problems should be fixed in the January Postal One update. And then really the new deadline for when these invoices would actually be active would be in April 2015. And that really gives the mailing industry just a few months to look at that scorecard, take a look at their processes, see where the problems are, and make adjustments. So unfortunately, it is a very short turnaround time, especially with this postponement of the November release, for mailers to be able to actually react to their mailer scorecard, make the necessary changes to avoid these invoices. And then looking forward to the summer, that's when additional invoices would be active for move update and then also for e-induction.
So one thing just to comment here, one of the things that we can tell you is there's been a lot of industry discussion going on around these invoices that we've been participating in, and so the Postal Service is kind of, they slid the deadline for full service invoicing from January to April, but really when you look at it, the position from the industry is, instead of just sliding the date, what the Postal Service should be doing is saying we need to define a point in time when the data is declared to be good. And once that timeline, once that data point is met, then that starts a clock ticking that would say, 3 months, 6 months, X amount of time after the data is declared to be good is when invoicing would begin, instead of just sliding it. So I know there's going to be a lot of continued discussion around that, and it'll be interesting to see where this ends up.
Yeah, so that unfortunately invoices are still a moving target. We'll see how that lands.
All right, so one of the things that we wanted to do also is spend a little bit of time talking about seamless acceptance. For those of you that may or may not be familiar with it, it's really going to become the next phase of full service that many of you, once you get onto full service, are going to start running into. Right now, seamless acceptance, there are 15% of all the mail volume that is flowing through the Postal Service right now is going through seamless acceptance. And the Postal Service is reporting that slightly more than 100 sites are currently live with seamless and actively doing seamless acceptance. And So what's going to happen for those of you that are transitioning more and more onto full service is once you hit 75% of your mail volume going as full service, you will automatically be turned on for seamless parallel. And so then you will start seeing the additional data around seamless acceptance being reported on your scorecard as well. And so there is a period of time where the Postal Service will be working with you to get your arms around what the data is telling you and what changes might need to be made to get your numbers where they need to be for seamless acceptance. And then, once certain thresholds have been met, then at that point in time you would be moved on to what would be called fully live with seamless acceptance. The one thing to call out is the Postal Service has noted that they are continuing to move mailers into seamless parallel, but temporarily right now they are on hold as far as moving any more mailers into full seamless acceptance. I believe what they're doing right now is they're going through the audit processes to make sure that the seamless acceptance process meets the SOX requirements needed to comply, and then once they get the green light on all of that, I think that will be where they would reopen the door then and continue moving mailers into full seamless acceptance. All right, so if we look beyond January, we've talked a little bit about the two possible scenarios of a price change. We're putting our bets on April and October/September time frame. And so the one other thing to note along with what Kim walked through is there has been a lot of feedback from the industry as well that it would be bad for the industry to have to deal with two different price changes in a single year. And so, there's been a lot of feedback to the Postal Service to just keep it to a single price change in a year. And, it would probably also be good for Postal One as well. And so based on that, I think it is likely that, we will only see a single price change. And so at the point that occurs, whether that's April or it's September, October, one of the things that we will expect to happen is that there will be a new version of Mail.dat and likely new versions of Mail XML. And so Mail.dat would move to 15-1. The one thing to keep in mind too is when the Postal Service moves to a new major version of Mail.dat, they only support the two most recent versions. So at the point that we do move to 15-1 later in 2015, then 14-1 will officially become unsupported by Postal One. And so for those of you that may still be doing 14-1s and it's working great for you, you can continue to use that. You're probably not going to want to mess with it during the fall mailing season, but I would recommend once you get into the new year, it would be worthwhile to start that transition to 14-2, so then when we get to the next release, you're not going to be caught off guard and have to be scrambling at the last minute to make that move. Also, one would fully expect that there will be new postage statements that will come out with the price changes when that occurs, and that there would be a major release of Postal One at that time. Also, this is again looking kind of into that crystal ball a little bit, but we do believe it is possible that there may be possible mail preparation changes too that would be considered. What those are, I would say, are still to be determined, but it's definitely not outside of the realm of possibility, and we all just need to kind of be planning for that.
All right, so there's all the bad news. We do have a little bit of good news to add to the end of the webinar today, and that is that the Post Office has published their list of what I would consider to be proposed incentives for 2015. So these new incentives have not yet been proposed to the PRC. This is something that they intend to post to the PRC whenever they get around to it, and they are subject to PRC approval, so we will need to make sure that that happens before they're actually live. But these are the 4 different incentives that they've proposed for 2015. Now you'll notice a couple things about the incentives here. And the first is that there are only 4. So in previous years, we had several promotions of several different types that ran all over the course of the year, and it was almost difficult just to keep track of them all. There were so many different types, and they all had different rules about when they applied, and does this one require full service, or does it just require electronic documentation? There are all these different things around the incentives that were kind of all over the place. So they've consolidated for 2015 all of the incentives into a core 4 different incentive programs. You'll notice that all of these incentives are actually ones that have run in the past. So we've got the earned value promotion. So that's the one where you get a discount on, or you get a rebate for all the mail that comes back as business reply mail or customer reply mail. You've got the Color Trans Promo promotion, which is a first-class incentive where you get a 2% discount on your mail if you include a promotional piece in color on your statement or invoice. You've also got the Emerging and Advanced Technology promotion. This is a standard mail and first-class mail promotion, and it gives you a 2% upfront discount on your postage if you use advanced technology such as NFC or advanced augmented reality. So if you use some of those more current, those really digital ways of being able to interact with the mail, then you can get a discount for that. And then they are going to bring back that very popular Mail Drives Mobile engagement program. So that's where you get a 2% upfront discount for your mail if you link your piece of mail to a mobile shopping cart. So if you have maybe a QR code or something like that that points them at your mobile site where they can purchase your information. You can purchase your goods online from a mobile website. And then that of course coincides with the fall mailing season and the holidays and everything like that to give everybody a good discount at the end of the year. You'll notice also that all of the incentives for 2015 are significantly longer. So previously, when we had all of these different promotions, each one usually was only about 2 months long. And so it was very difficult for mailers to kind of, first of all, to plan ahead, and then also to be able to get everything up and running for just this very short period of time. So several of the promotions this time are actually going to go for a full 6-month period. So that's going to give mailers a really good chance to start working with these promotions, see what options work best for you, and really get the best value out of these incentive programs. And no webinar would be complete without an appendix of additional places that you can go to get upcoming information here. So a lot of the information that we presented today about the invoices is available using the mail entry roadmap that the post office has published. There's a full document that describes all of the different metrics that they're measuring for full service, e-induction, and seamless. It tells you what the thresholds are, what each of those metrics are and what they mean, and when they're going to be applied. So as things change, as they change the dates for when the incentives are going to apply, all of that will be updated on the mail entry roadmap. There's also that 2015 release schedule up on RIBS. As you noted today, that still that page right now is completely blank. However, as soon as they update that, then you'll have that information as to what's going to happen in that January Postal One update. And of course, you do want to have RIBS in your quick links there in your bookmarks to access all of your information about mail preparation. And also, we do recommend subscribing to the DMM Advisory if you haven't already. If you send a quick email to dmmadvisory@usps.gov, they will subscribe you to a little email chain here where you can actually get information as it's kind of as late breaking news that you get sent right into your email box. So things like if the PRC approval comes in, some type of a ruling comes in, you'll get a notice with the DMM Advisory. Any of these Postal One changes and all of the different dates that are happening, all of that comes in through that DMM Advisory. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do, because that's a really great source of information.
All right, I'm going to jump in here with a couple of reminders. First off, there's a question box on your screen, and if you've got questions for Kim or for Bob, please enter those now. They're standing by to answer those. The other thing is, if you didn't get a chance to memorize those rather lengthy links that Kim just showed, this presentation will be up on the SatoriSoftware.com website, and you'll get an opportunity to go back and review those very long links.
Sorry.
All right. Before we jump into the question and answer session, I'd like to mention what's coming up next in our webinar series. Our next webinar will be called Lessons Learned from a Political Mailing Powerhouse. That's November 13th at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. That's tomorrow.
That is tomorrow.
This is a very busy week for webinars at Satori Software.
Yeah.
All right, Kim, you got questions coming in over there.
Yeah, so I did have a question here. It says, will the new SCF rate changes, with the new SCF rate changes next year, can I enter an Everett or Walla Walla permit at the Seattle BMEU? So that's a really great question. And so just to kind of take a step back, you'll remember with all of the SCF closures that have happened over the past couple years, the post office put into place some kind of side deals, I guess I would call them. They weren't really published, but they basically had an agreement with mailers who had formerly submitted their mail in one of these closed centers that they could continue to deposit their mail at those centers and continue to get the SCF discount. So what the post office has announced is that those deals are actually going to end in 2015. So it's not a great deal for a lot of mailers, but it is kind of in line with all of the changes that they're making for network rationalization. So what's going to happen is you will not be able to continue to get your SCF discount at locations like the Everett, the old SCF in Everett or Walla Walla. However, if you are mailing, I believe it's 90% of your eligible mail as full service, then you can be eligible for a program called Mail Anywhere. And what that does is with the Mail Anywhere program, first of all, you will not be required to pay any permit fees for any permits that you open. So you could open a permit for the Seattle BMEU, and that would not be an additional cost to you. Or you could also use your existing permit that you have at the Everett office to deposit your mail at the Seattle SCF. So however, you do have to have 90% of your mail of your eligible mail be mailed in full service. So that's just one of those additional carrots that they're throwing out there to get people to migrate their mail over to full service. But you would be able to continue to mail using your existing permit at the Seattle location.
Okay, Bob, you've got a question?
Yes. So one of the questions coming in is that mailers are seeing a variation in the date of when the new monthly Presort data is posted, and so when should mailers expect to see that? And so just to talk a little bit about the way that schedule works is the Postal Service always publishes the data on the first business day of the month, and so so that means it will vary also, just because if the first day of the month is on a Saturday or Sunday, it will not get posted until Monday. And so it gets posted on the first day of the month, and then the industry has agreed to turn that data around and make it available for customers to be able to start using it and working with it within 5 business days. And so, 5 business days from when the data is published is when you should be seeing it becoming available from Satori. However, one of the things that we are working with the Postal Service on is that when the Postal Service publishes the data, there are times when we have problems, we find problems with the data that they published. And the data that was just published for December, which was published, December data that was published on November 1st, had some problems with it. Mm-hmm. And so we actually, industry and postal went back and forth to get that data corrected, which usually takes a couple of business days, which then also delays, when that data gets turned around and released to you to begin using it. So ideally within 5 business days, you will be seeing updates, but there are on months where there are problems with the data, it is possible that it could slide a little bit further than that.
So a very timely question. How much do we know about the hack that occurred last week, and where can we get more information on that?
Oh, that's a great question. So, there's a lot of speculation about what the source of the attack was. There have been some news sources that have been citing that the incident came out of China, and that it may have been government related. I don't know how reliable those reports are. That's not what the post office has published.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yes. Allegedly. Innocent until proven guilty, right? So the post office has been very tight-lipped about this whole incident. Obviously, they want to make sure that their systems are secure, and so they're going to want to make sure that everything's very, very contained until they have a good handle on what's going on. They have activated the FBI, Homeland Security, some private security experts. They've got all of their big guns looking at their systems and making sure that everything's secure, which of course means that everything's been on lockdown. Nothing's been updated on RIBs. Postal One updates have been postponed. Everything's kind of been put into a state of stasis until they get this all resolved. So they did publish, however, what areas were affected by this security breach. The main and probably the most troubling one is that some employee records were compromised. So there was some personally identifiable information from USPS employees that unfortunately was made available to these hackers, and that's really unfortunate for the employees of the post office, and that's really regrettable. There was some mailer data that was compromised as part of this incident. However, it's mainly just call center information, so times and dates of phone calls. Probably the most identifiable of information would be your company name and your phone number. Maybe your email
it's on your
address,
business card anyway.
but no mailer financial information was compromised. So the mailing industry can take a sigh of relief. It's really unfortunate that all of that personal identifiable information of the employees was made available. So.
Well, and so one other comment to make on that too, just my own personal thoughts on it is, so Randy Muskanek is VP of Secure Digital Services for the Postal Service, and Randy is also still part of the inspection service, so he's still packing. So he has, I am positive he is all over this, and I would not be want to be the ones that were contributing to it.
They have some serious teeth in the inspection service,
yeah,
so I hope they get them.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. I'd like to say thank you to both of our speakers today, Kim Mock, Postal Product Specialist for Satori Software. Kim, thank you for coming into the studio.
Thanks, Rob.
And thank you to Bob Shimmick, Senior Director of Postal Affairs. Always a pleasure.
Yes, and I will see you tomorrow.
That's right. That's tomorrow, isn't it? Thank you for joining us today. Please take a moment to complete the brief survey you will be offered at the end of this presentation so that we can continue to improve our webinar series. As I mentioned, this webinar will be available in its entirety in the webinar section of the SatoriSoftware.com website. For Satori Software, I'm Rob Perrin, the Director of Merchandising. Once again, thank you for attending this webinar, and we at Satori would like to wish you smooth mailing ahead.